Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you never thought to protect yourself from them? It's a quiet kind of blindness, the kind that comes not from ignorance, but from love, from years spent building something you thought was mutual. You share plans, passwords, dreams, and then one evening, a voice you know better than your own calmly tells you it's over. And worse, it was never mutual. My name is Marcus Walker. I'm 47, a retired Army intelligence officer. I've faced ambushes, interrogations, and betrayal in war zones, but nothing prepares you for the kind that comes from across the dinner table, especially when it arrives not with rage, but with strategy. She said, "I'm leaving you for my boss. We're in love, and I've already transferred the money just like that." No yelling, no apology, just the sound of someone executing a plan they'd been rehearsing for months. But here's the thing. I'd been rehearsing too. While she thought she was fooling me, I was 2 steps ahead, documenting, preparing, protecting everything we'd built. What she didn't know is that I'd already moved the real assets. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of control, justice, and the quiet strength of a man who refuses to be broken. I wasn't always the calm, composed man who listened to his wife dismantle their marriage over a phone call without raising his voice. That composure was earned, built over years in uniform, in war zones where hesitation cost lives. I'd spent over 2 decades in Army intelligence, tracking insurgent networks, decoding patterns others couldn't see. Precision was survival. When I left active duty at 41, I didn't retire. I simply changed battlegrounds. Civilian life, especially the corporate world, has its own kind of warfare. So I founded a small but high-level cybersecurity firm in Austin, Texas, offering discrete services to government contractors and infrastructure agencies. My clients valued discretion, reliability, and strategic thinking. So did I. Erin and I met 10 years ago on an Army base in Kuwait. She was a combat nurse, quick-witted, sharp, and composed under pressure. We bonded over long nights, bad coffee, and stories we couldn't tell anyone else. When we married, it felt like building something solid, something real. After her honorable discharge, Erin pivoted into pharmaceutical sales, a natural transition for someone who could charm generals and comfort dying soldiers in the same breath. She excelled. Promotions came fast. So did the high heels, the networking, galas, the constant flights. We bought a house on the outskirts of Austin, a modern build, all glass and steel, overlooking the Greenbelt. To neighbors, we looked like a power couple. Behind closed doors, we functioned like a unit. Scheduled finances, quarterly check-ins, joint savings strategies. I set up our investment infrastructure, crypto, real estate, and high-yield accounts, all under a shared trust, or so she thought. Erin was never the kind to dive into details. I handled the money, she enjoyed the returns. I wasn't flashy about it, but our net worth had quietly crossed 7 figures thanks to careful planning, a few government contracts, and one successful tech equity exit. At some point, though, our marriage became less about connection and more about logistics. The little things started to fade. I noticed it first in the way her phone was always face down on the table, how she started traveling more frequently, how certain conference dates didn't match up with public company schedules. I didn't say anything. In my line of work, suspicion is an instinct, but proof is power. So I watched. I waited. A year ago, I restructured everything. I created a decoy joint investment account, modest in size, just enough to appear legitimate, and moved our real assets into a new cold storage, crypto wallet secured under my name alone, biometric access, encrypted authentication, no backdoor. I converted part of our liquid investments into land, placed under a single-member LLC, again, mine. The trust remained, but with revised language that Erin had signed without reading. Too busy texting during dinner, too confident that I would always handle the boring stuff. I also implemented security layers she never noticed. Dual authentication for transfers over $10,000, audit logs for access attempts, a discrete notification, system that pinged me each time someone tried to probe the crypto account. Most importantly, I began documenting everything. Her travel inconsistencies, changes in spending patterns, call logs, email headers, and metadata. collected and encrypted in a digital vault. You see, in combat, you don't confront the enemy at the first sign of movement. You study their behavior. You identify the patterns. Then when they finally make their move, you already own the battlefield. So when Erin made that call from her supposed conference in San Diego and dropped the line about taking the money, I didn't panic. I didn't shout. I didn't even flinch, because she had just walked into a scenario I'd spent months engineering. She believed she'd taken everything, that I'd be devastated, paralyzed, but she didn't understand that intelligence work teaches you to smile while people lie to your face and to be 10 steps ahead by the time they finish their sentence. She thought she was executing a perfect exit, but what she had really done was trigger the final phase of a countermeasure I'd been refining since the first time she came home wearing a different perfume. And so, while she was in California with her new lover, her boss, I sat alone in our kitchen, drinking black coffee, watching a false crypto transfer hang in digital limbo, pending approval. Mine. The morning after the call, the sun rose like any other over the Austin skyline, indifferent to the collapse of a marriage. I stood by the kitchen window holding a mug of reheated coffee, staring at the horizon while my mind replayed her words on a loop. I've already transferred the money. Her voice had been so calm, as if it were just another task on her calendar, wedged between a morning keynote and a lunch with her regional director, also known as the man she left me for, Ryan Caldwell. Lieutenant Colonel turned Executive VP, the kind of man who probably still saluted himself in the mirror. I'd met him once at a corporate dinner years ago. Polished, overly familiar, always circling the table like a man scanning for weaknesses. Erin had laughed too hard at his jokes that night, but I let it go. He wasn't worth the energy then. Now it seemed she thought he was worth everything. I sat at my desk and logged into our mock investment portal. Sure enough, there it was, a transfer request for $340,000, pending. I clicked through the back end. Logs. She'd attempted access at 11:27 p.m., the same minute my phone rang. She wanted to strike clean and walk away with the spoils, but all she did was alert the system I'd rigged for this exact moment. The account she accessed was a shell, a mirror. The real funds had been split across multiple wallets, inaccessible without my biometric key. Even if she knew where to look, she wouldn't get past the encryption. Her so-called victory was nothing more than a simulation, a digital decoy blinking back at her like a locked vault with no keyhole. I didn't reject the transfer. I didn't cancel it either. I let it hang there incomplete, suspended in a kind of purgatory. The more time passed, the more anxious she would grow, and that anxiety was part of the design. She hadn't called again yet. That surprised me. Erin wasn't the kind to wait around for clarity, unless she thought she didn't need it. She believed she'd outmaneuvered me. That was her first miscalculation. Around noon, I received a text from an unknown number. Need confirmation on the account. Let me know when it clears. No signature, no name. But the arrogance practically bled through the screen. I replied with a single word. Pending. 5 minutes later, she called. I let it ring, then sent it to voicemail. Whatever plan she thought she had in motion, it was already unraveling. And that's when I understood something deeper. This wasn't just about the money, it was about control. She'd chosen someone like Caldwell not because he was better, but because he represented the next power move. She thought she'd leveled up. In her eyes, I had become obsolete, too steady, too quiet, too unimpressed by her evolution into corporate royalty. But while she'd been seeking validation in boardrooms and hotel lounges, I'd been quietly rewriting the rules of our partnership. She'd treated our life like a contract she could exit. I treated it like a system, one with redundancies, protocols, and contingencies. That afternoon, I drove across town to a secure facility where my cold storage hardware wallet was kept. Not at home, not in a safe. Those are the first places people look. It was stored off-site under a pseudonym guarded by two-factor and biometric access. I ran a check on the holdings. Untouched. Still there. Still mine. And yet, something strange stirred in me. Not anger, but an eerie stillness. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even surprised. I felt like a soldier who'd already walked the minefield in his head 100 times and was now simply following the route he'd mapped. That evening, as the Texas sky deepened into violet and gold, another message came through. This time, from her personal email. We should discuss this like adults. I want this to be peaceful. The irony almost made me smile. She'd deployed deception like a weapon, thinking I'd respond with desperation. Instead, she was met with silence. Because silence in the right hands is strategy. I didn't answer. Instead, I reviewed the surveillance footage from our home security system. The day before she left, she'd spent 45 minutes in my study, rifling through files, scanning papers, probably trying to piece together enough financial intel to complete her exit. But everything of value was encrypted, secured, or decoyed. Her attempt left digital fingerprints I could trace. I took screenshots, time-stamped everything, let her try to play the victim in court. By midnight, I'd compiled a new folder titled Phase 2. It contained financial logs, metadata, screenshots, and access attempts, all digitally signed and admissible in court. I backed it up to 2 secure cloud accounts under alias credentials. Then I printed one hard copy and placed it in a fireproof envelope marked for my lawyer. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was executing a recovery op, and she was walking straight into it. Long before we were 2 strangers on opposite ends of a financial battlefield, Erin and I were something closer to comrades. I met her in Iraq, 2009. It was blistering hot, and the air smelled like diesel and sweat. She was a combat nurse with a kind of composed intensity that silenced a room without raising her voice. I was on a joint intel assignment, tracking movements near the Syrian border. One day, after an IED took out a convoy en route Irish, I saw her stabilize a soldier with a shredded femoral artery using just a belt, gauze, and grit. That's how she was, unflinching, efficient, sharp as broken glass but with a softness she reserved for people too broken to save themselves. We bonded over war, over silence, over the ability to sit together and say nothing at all. She was one of the few people who didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer, and I gave her something she wasn't used to: stillness. I wasn't flashy. I didn't try to impress her. I just listened. After deployment, we reconnected, in DC during a military fundraiser. I was up for reassignment. She had just accepted a position with a private medical firm. The transition from war to peace was jarring for both of us. We clung to each other because we understood what the other had been through without needing to describe it. A year later, we got married in a courthouse ceremony, just the 2 of us and a judge who wore the same tired expression I'd seen on mid-tour commanders. We settled in Austin because it felt like neutral ground. Not too quiet, not too chaotic. We bought a home in a good school district even though we weren't sure we'd ever have kids. Erin wanted them. So did I, in theory. But years passed and biology didn't cooperate. After a battery of tests, the verdict was mine. Low count, low mobility. The odds weren't in our favor. I remember the day we got the results. We sat in the car outside the clinic in complete silence. She stared straight ahead, gripping the printout like it had insulted her personally. I reached over, took her hand, and said we'd figure it out. She nodded. But we never really did. We didn't talk about IVF or adoption or plans, we just moved on. Except we didn't. Not really. She buried herself in work, and I buried myself in systems. She started rising fast in her company. New clients, leadership tracks, late-night dinners. I never questioned it out loud, but I noticed. The clothes changed. The makeup became a little sharper, her smile a little more polished. She stopped, asking me about my day, and started checking her phone even when we were supposed to be off-grid together. But I said nothing. Because men like me don't complain. We observe, absorb, adapt. We tried to reconnect once, an anniversary trip to Santa Fe. I booked us a private cabin, filled the fridge with her favorite wine, even left my laptop at home. But she spent most of the weekend on Zoom calls. Q4 targets don't sleep, she said with a smirk. I laughed with her, but the laugh didn't reach my chest. That was the first night I slept on the couch, not out of anger but resignation. As the years rolled by, we started operating like business partners. The romance wasn't dead, just outsourced. Scheduled date nights, budget meetings, shared calendars with color-coded categories, blue for her travel, green for my consultations, red for joint obligations we both secretly hoped would get canceled. And yet, I never stopped protecting her. When a disgruntled client tried to leak her personal info online, I traced the source, neutralized it within hours. When her firm went through a hostile merger, I coached her through the negotiation tactics. I even built a firewall around her cloud accounts, ironic in retrospect. Looking back now, I realized the signs had been there. She became evasive about finances, questioning my transfers, asking for more transparency, as if the man who managed both their retirements and classified operations couldn't be trusted with a brokerage statement. When I tried to engage her, in decisions whether to sell the lake house or reinvest in one of my startups, she brushed it off. You handle it, that's your world. It was subtle, this disconnection. Not the kind that erupts in shouting matches or slammed doors, but the kind that erodes you, the kind that makes you realize one day you're married to someone who hasn't looked you in the eyes during a conversation in months. But even then, I didn't stop trusting her. Not completely. That was my failure. Not seeing that the woman, who once held bleeding soldiers together in tents, was now carefully tearing apart a life we had built, slowly, methodically, and with surgical precision. And while I had protected her from the outside world for years, I hadn't realized I needed to protect myself from the one person I thought never would become the enemy. The day after Aaron's call, I woke early, same as always, before the sun rose, before the house stirred. Old habits die hard. In the Army, I was trained to start before the world had the chance to catch up, and I carried that ritual into civilian life. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen island, and opened my encrypted vault. It was time to examine the real depth of what Aaron had been doing behind my back. I started with the digital trails, harmless at first glance, but details, the kind most people overlook, are what I was trained to see. Emails sent at odd hours from her work address to non-corporate domains, phone calls routed through encrypted apps like Signal and Telegram. Metadata told stories her voice never would. One string of messages referenced an upcoming conference in Dallas, though the hotel confirmation she'd printed at home listed a beachfront resort in Baja California. Then I checked the house logs. Months earlier, I'd installed a silent monitoring system in my study and home office, motion-triggered camera, temperature sensors, and digital fingerprint trackers on select files. I wasn't spying. I was protecting sensitive client data. At least that's what I told myself then. 2 weeks before her call, the logs showed Aaron had spent nearly 43 minutes inside my office on a day she was supposedly working from the clinic. The safe had been opened using her code, the one I hadn't changed in years. She rifled through documents she had never shown interest in before, backup contracts, LLC registrations, cold wallet keys, and printed crypto transactions. She wasn't browsing out of curiosity. She was looking for leverage. Unfortunately for her, all the important papers, transfer authorizations, crypto seed phrases, real asset documentation, were behind a secondary biometric layer she couldn't access. The camera feed confirmed it. Her face bathed in the blue glow of the tablet screen as she squinted in confusion. She scrolled, paused, tried different folders, but ultimately found nothing useful. I smiled slightly. The safe had done its job, held its silence, and in doing so told me everything I needed to know. But the real discovery came later that afternoon when I reviewed one of her external hard drives. She'd left it plugged into our shared desktop, likely assuming I'd never go looking. It was an encrypted folder labeled innocuously as client docs. 10 minutes later, I cracked it. Inside were exported spreadsheets, contact databases, client histories, pricing models from one of my government subcontracting firms. My firm. She hadn't just been cheating with her boss. She'd been leaking proprietary data. And not just to anyone. to Caldwell's new defense-adjacent startup, Phoenix Care Systems, which had just won a federal contract I'd been shortlisted for. Now it wasn't just personal. It was criminal. I immediately transferred all files to an external drive and labeled it Exfil A. Then I logged onto a secure cloud storage platform I used only in high-risk situations, contract violations, hostile corporate probes, whistleblower contingencies. I uploaded the evidence and locked it behind a two-step cryptographic key shared only with my legal advisor and one trusted name from the past, Derek Frost, a former military legal officer turned investigator at the Department of Justice. That night I texted Derek. Might be something you need to see, civilian, federal, maybe industrial espionage, discreet? His reply came fast. Always. Drop location? We arranged a handoff. While the legal gears began turning quietly in the background, I started preparing the next phase of my internal response. I compiled screenshots of every message, folder structure, timestamp, and transfer attempt Aaron had made over the past 3 months. I labeled them clearly, attached notes, and created a chronological narrative that any legal team could follow. In one folder, I found a PDF titled Transition Plan Q4. It wasn't work-related, it was personal. It listed dates for property, evaluations, planned withdrawal amounts, estimated living expenses, and one particular bullet that stopped me cold. Secure assets before confrontation. He won't react immediately. She had calculated my silence, predicted it, counted on it. That cut deeper than the affair. Not because she'd guessed right, but because she no longer saw me as a person, but as an equation. And in war, when someone starts reducing you to a variable in their strategy, there's only one thing left to do, outmaneuver them. So I made copies of everything, stored them in multiple locations, digital and physical, one in a fireproof box in my truck, one mailed to Derek, another locked in my bank's private vault. I didn't trust any single point of failure, and I didn't intend to confront her yet. That would come later, when the advantage was entirely mine. The last thing I did that evening was visit our master bedroom. Her side of the closet was nearly empty now. Just a few shoes, a perfume bottle she must have forgotten, and a drawer with costume jewelry. Not the good stuff. That she'd taken, or so she thought. I opened the small safe beneath the bed, hers. Inside was a velvet box. I opened it. The engagement ring I gave her lay still in its setting. Next to it, a USB drive marked Contracts Final. I slipped it into my pocket without a word. Aaron had played her hand. Now it was my move. 2 days after Aaron's failed withdrawal attempt and her unread follow-up messages, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most people knew to text before showing up. I walked to the door, checked the security feed, and there she was. Vanessa, Aaron's closest friend, maid of honor at our wedding. Corporate climber, always dressed like she was about to be interviewed by Forbes. Even now, she stood on my doorstep in designer heels and a long beige coat, clutching a monogrammed leather purse with both hands like it was a shield. I opened the door. She offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Marcus," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer. I simply stepped aside. She walked in with a confidence I recognized. Fake calm, covering real tension. The kind I'd seen on junior officers when they had to deliver bad news to higher-ups. I motioned toward the kitchen table, and she sat, adjusting the sleeves of her coat even though they were perfectly fine. "She asked me to get a few things," Vanessa began. Her winter coats, some personal items, and in her jewelry box. I nodded slowly. "Of course, you know where it is." Vanessa didn't move. Her eyes flicked to the hallway, then back to me. She also asked me to check if the transfer went through. There it was. The real reason for her visit. Not warmth, not loyalty, not even friendship. She was the scout, sent ahead to gauge the damage and report back. Aaron didn't have the courage to face me directly. Not yet. She'd dispatched Vanessa, hoping her presence would soften the blow, maybe even prompt me to play the part of the humiliated, heartbroken husband who still wanted to make peace. Stood, walked to the counter and opened my laptop. "I'll show you," I said flatly. Vanessa leaned in as I turned the screen toward her. The bank portal loaded and there it was, clear as day. Status pending, authorization required, dual key security. A failsafe designed for exactly this kind of situation. Her withdrawal couldn't process without my biometric confirmation. And she didn't have it. Would never have it. I looked at Vanessa. "It's in the agreement. Any transaction over 10,000 needs dual approval." We both signed it. She stared at the screen, then slowly exhaled. "She's not going to like this." "She made a choice," I replied. "Choices have consequences." For a moment, Vanessa sat in silence. She looked less polished now, her posture more rigid. Guilt was creeping in, quietly, but definitely. "I told her not to do this." "She," whispered. "I told her it wasn't worth it, but she kept saying Caldwell could give her the life she deserved. Promotions, a fresh start." "How long?" I asked. Her eyes dropped. "At least 6 months, maybe more. San Diego wasn't the first trip, just the final one." I nodded, unsurprised. I already had the timeline mapped out, but hearing it from someone else made it real, in a different way. "She said you wouldn't fight her," Vanessa continued. "That you'd just let her go. That you'd be too disciplined to retaliate." "She was right," I said. "I won't retaliate." She looked at me, confused. "Then why all this? The safeguards, the logs, the dual key protocols?" "Because I'm not retaliating, I'm protecting what's mine." Vanessa stood, clearly uncomfortable now. She was caught between loyalties, whatever remained of them. She reached for her purse and hesitated. "She'll try again," she said. "Maybe through legal means, maybe something else. You know that, right?" I nodded. "Let her try." She walked toward the door. I followed her, then stopped. "One more thing," I said. "Tell her the ring's still here, in the safe." Vanessa turned slowly. "She probably doesn't care." Then telling her, "Won't hurt." She left without another word. As I watched her car pull out of the driveway, I felt no anger, no sadness, just a slow rising certainty. This wasn't a moment of loss. It was the beginning of clarity. Erin had shown me who she was. Vanessa had confirmed it. Back inside, I closed the laptop and pulled out the physical files I'd prepared. The legal dossier was nearly complete. One final piece remained: the formal filing for divorce and asset protection, including documentation of her attempted withdrawal, unauthorized data access, and breach of trust. The next morning, I called my attorney. His voice was steady, curious. "Ready to move forward?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Good. Because she just retained a lawyer too." Of course she had. The battle wasn't over. But now, the field was mine, and I'd already fortified every position. 3 days later, I walked into the law offices of Redmond and Tate, documents in hand and mind clear. My attorney, David Redmond, was a former JAG lawyer turned specialist in high-asset divorce litigation. We'd served on the same base back in Qatar, and though we hadn't spoken in years, when I'd called him, he said only one thing: "Bring everything. Let's get to work." His office overlooked downtown Austin, clean lines, steel fixtures, nothing ornamental, just the way I liked it. On his desk, I placed a flash drive, a bound folder, and the envelope that had once sat untouched in my fireproof box. Inside was everything: emails, financial records, metadata logs, and screen captures of Erin's unauthorized attempts to access protected accounts. Her financial betrayal alone would have made a strong case. But with the proprietary data theft and unauthorized export of client information, David said it best after scanning the evidence. "She didn't just cross a line, Marcus. She nuked the bridge." We filed immediately. Not a simple divorce, but a strategic petition backed by evidence of financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and potential federal violations. We weren't accusing her of criminal conduct. Yet. But the implication was clear. Push too far, and we won't just play defense. That same afternoon, Aaron's attorney, Martin Lowell, the kind of man who wore watches more expensive than most mortgages, called to open a dialogue. The tone was civil, but I could hear the pressure behind it. Aaron had already shared her version of the story, no doubt painting me as cold, controlling, emotionally distant. But she hadn't anticipated that I would come to the table armed not with emotion, but with proof. A man with receipts is more dangerous than one with rage. The meeting was set for 3 days later. I arrived early, suited in charcoal gray, nothing flashy, just clean, sharp, composed. David met me in the conference room and handed me a copy of the proposal we were putting forward. Aaron would waive all claims to the house, the crypto fund, the business, and any future spousal support. In return, she would receive a one-time settlement of $30,000 and would sign a strict non-disclosure agreement covering both our financial history and her actions during the marriage. It wasn't a threat. It was an escape hatch. A lifeline, really. Aaron arrived exactly on time, as she always had in the past. Punctuality was her armor. She walked in wearing a navy blue blazer and a look of controlled neutrality. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. She sat across from me, flanked by Lowell, whose confidence flickered the moment David slid our documents across the table. Lowell flipped through the pages quickly, but I saw the muscles in his jaw tense. He paused at the evidence appendix. "This is detailed," he said. "It's not exhaustive," David replied smoothly. "But it's sufficient." Aaron looked at me, her eyes searching for any trace of the man she used to know. I gave her nothing. "You're offering almost nothing," Lowell said finally. $30,000 in silence after a 15-year marriage. David leaned forward. "Silence is the most generous thing in this agreement." That landed. Lowell sat back, clearly recalculating. Aaron's composure began to fray. Her fingers tightened around the pen she hadn't yet used. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I knew that silence. It was the sound of a trained negotiator realizing she no longer had leverage. "I didn't think you'd take it this far," she said finally. "You already did," I replied. "You just didn't expect me to catch up." She glanced at her lawyer. He gave a small nod, subtle, but definitive. Lowell cleared his throat. "We'd like to request a 24-hour window to review the NDA terms." David nodded. "Of course. But be advised, the digital evidence, if introduced, would become part of the public record. Every email, every transfer, every login attempt. This agreement protects both parties. You break it, you risk exposure." When they left the room, I stayed seated. David said nothing at first, then, "She didn't think you'd fight back. She didn't think I'd need to." That evening, as I drove home, I passed the neighborhood where Aaron and I once looked at homes we couldn't yet afford. We'd dreamed of a future that never came, and now she was about to walk away not just from the marriage, but from everything she thought she was owed. This wasn't revenge. This was equilibrium, and for the first time in years I felt the scales beginning to balance. 48 hours after that meeting, a signed settlement arrived at David's office, complete with Aaron's signature and a notarized NDA. No objections. No further negotiations. Just a quiet, formal end to a 15-year partnership she had once believed she could control from a distance. $30,000. No access to the house. No stake in the company. No claim to the trust or crypto. Assets, just silence, exactly as promised. But the story didn't end there, because some debts aren't measured in money. That same morning, I received an encrypted message from Derek Frost, my old JAG contact at the DOJ. The note was short. "Your files were reviewed. Internal interest confirmed. No formal investigation yet, but informal inquiries underway." He added a smiley face, which in Derek's world meant, "Keep feeding us, but do it cleanly." Caldwell had always presented himself as a model veteran turned executive. He leveraged military prestige to build trust with private defense clients, pharmaceutical giants, and mid-tier government agencies. But the more I dug, the more I realized his career was held together by a web of charm, favoritism, and backroom favors. He wasn't just sleeping with subordinates, he was leveraging those relationships to gain access to systems, contacts, and documents he had no legal right to possess. Erin wasn't his first mark. She was just the one who happened to be married to someone trained to recognize an operational pattern. That afternoon, I assembled a slim but damning portfolio. Nothing that implicated Erin directly. My fight with her was already settled, but enough to clearly show Caldwell's misuse of confidential business data, abuse of chain-of-command relationships, and questionable financial moves traced through shadow entities. I sent the files through an anonymous submission portal to the Department of Veterans Affairs, the SEC, and the Office of Inspector General. I also blind copied them to the Compliance Division of Phoenix Care Systems, the company that had recently announced Caldwell as their incoming Chief Strategy Officer. The first ripple landed 3 days later. A discreet update appeared on Phoenix Care's site, leadership transition delay due to internal review. Then his LinkedIn vanished. Then came the whispers, industry groups sharing half-confirmed news of an investigation, an ethical violation, possible federal attention. I didn't gloat, I didn't forward links. I simply watched the system I'd trusted begin to respond in kind. Meanwhile, I turned my focus toward rebuilding, not just financially, but intentionally. I converted a portion of the trust Erin had tried to drain into a scholarship fund for veterans entering cybersecurity. The Marcus Walker Resilience Grant. It wasn't about public recognition. I kept my name off the website. But every time a vet sat down to learn how to protect systems from people like Caldwell, that was enough. Then, an offer came I didn't expect. The Department of Homeland Security reached out. Quietly. They'd seen my prior clearance level, read my testimony from previous federal audits, and had reviewed the materials I'd submitted. They were forming a new oversight unit focused on internal data abuse within contracted civilian tech firms, and they wanted me to consult. It wasn't about chasing bad guys with guns anymore. It was about prevention, about making sure no one else had to do what I'd done. Alone outside the chain of command, navigating betrayal with only training and instinct to guide them. I accepted. 2 weeks later, I moved into a new place on the northern edge of Austin. Smaller, quieter. A lot of glass, but tucked behind trees. No one knew the address except David and Derek. I didn't post pictures. I didn't make announcements. The life I was building now wasn't one that needed to be seen. It just needed to feel like mine. Then came the last message. It was from Vanessa. A simple one-line email. Thought you should know, she and Caldwell are done, she's looking for work. Asked about you. I stared at it for a moment. No reaction, no vindication. Just confirmation of something I'd already known. People. Like Erin and Caldwell build ladders made of people. When one rung snaps, they don't look down. They look for the next one. But eventually, you run out of steps. I closed the message, archived it, and returned to work. Later that night, I poured a small glass of bourbon, sat out on the new deck and listened to the cicadas hum in the darkness. The wind moved through the trees like breath. Everything was quiet now, not because nothing had happened, but because everything had. And I was still standing. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Clean, surgical, final, and justice. It had never looked louder than this moment of absolute peace. What does it mean to rebuild? Not from rage, but from reason. For me, it meant realizing that strength isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to protect, when to prepare, and when to walk away, not out of defeat, but with deliberate calm. Erin's betrayal didn't define me. It revealed the quiet truth that I'd been avoiding for years, the man I had become. In war was also the man I needed to be in peace, disciplined, measured, precise. She thought she was taking everything. What she actually did was give me back my freedom. In the end, justice didn't come through courtroom fireworks or public humiliation. It came through balance, through the quiet sense that every choice had met its consequence and every misstep had been accounted for. Today I live smaller but lighter. I've rebuilt something that's mine, not just financially but ethically, spiritually. And that weightlessness? That's what wholeness feels like. Let me ask you, have you ever protected something so well that when betrayal came, it walked right into a system designed to survive it? Leave a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated and turned that into your advantage? And if this story spoke to you, share it. Someone out there might need this reminder. You don't need to fight loud to win big.